On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we look at some top news items from the past week and speak with Rift.io on the use of open source NFV for management and network orchestration. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. This week's featured interview is with Rift.io, where we discuss the use of open source NFV for management and network orchestration. But first, let's take a look at some of the top headlines from across the space over the past week. Well, AT&T continues to tout the abilities of its ECOMP project with the latest link connected to policy management. Jen Yates, who's the Assistant VP at AT&T Labs, explained in a recent blog post that one of the goals for ECOMP is to provide for the design, creation, and lifecycle management of virtualized network functions in a flexible, dynamic, policy-driven manner, allowing users to dynamically control ECOMP's behavior without changing the system software. A more specific goal of the platform is automating the lifecycle of network-based services using control loops, which are designed to define how virtual machines, DNS, and service impairment are controlled. AT&T also noted policies are set to control aspects of ECOMP behavior, including service design, VNF change management, and management of the behavior of ECOMP components, with the ECOMP policy framework including creation, evaluation, decision distribution, and validation. AT&T unveiled the ECOMP initiative earlier this year, which it said was designed to automate network services and infrastructure running in a cloud environment. The carrier explained it had been working on ECOMP for nearly 2 years, tackling the project due to a lack of guidance for NFV and SDN deployments in a wide area network environment. Also this week, a recent report from Technology Business Research predicts global enterprises are on pace to spend $12 billion on SDN by 2020. Despite claims enterprises are still in the early phases of trialing SDN equipment, the report forecasts a 70.2% compound annual growth rate in enterprise-related SDN revenues between 2015 and 2020, with the majority of spend on infrastructure and displacing legacy technologies. However, to reach this revenue, TBR states vendors will need to be more proactive in helping enterprises move beyond the legacy business practices. TBR sees further challenges for hardware-centric vendors still grappling with new businesses and operational models. The research firm noted vendors like Cisco will likely see increased competition from vendors moving aggressively towards software-infused white boxes, opening up the opportunity for strategic alliances as SDN vendors look to bring new products to market. Those alliances are expected in strategic areas, including hyper-converged platforms and security, with SDN partnerships also set to open up new revenue streams for vendors able to serve broader use cases. Of course, vendor mindsets will also need to change in terms of working with rivals to further the SDN market. TBR noted progress has been made by various standards bodies to lessen the barriers to these partnerships based on the use of open source platforms, but vendors will need to be open to such initiatives if they want to benefit from the market. Well, for this week's featured interview, we speak with Ben Spinelli, who's the Senior Vice President for Global Sales, Marketing, and Business Development at Rift.io to discuss the use of open source NFV for management and network orchestration. Etsy recently tapped Codebase from Rift.io for the first release of its open source manual specifications. Before diving into the topic, Spinelli provided a brief overview of the company, as well as its view on the current development and deployment pace of NFV platforms. Let's take a look at the interview now. Well, thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News, and this week we are joined by Ben Spinelli, who's the Senior Vice President for Global Sales and Marketing and Business Development at Rift.io, to talk a bit about the NFV and SDN space. So, hey, Ben, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Great to be here. So maybe I'll start off with maybe having you start off, just give a little overview of the company for those who might not know much about you guys.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. So Rift.io is a company headquartered up in Boston, about 2.5 years old, and we are a software-defined networking company focused on orchestration with scale. What does that mean? So as we view the vast world of SDN and NFV out there, what we're focused on is really building a network resource orchestrator where we sit in between, above the Vim layer, so the OpenStack layer, but below the end-to-end lifecycle service orchestrator coming from the OSS folks. And we very much view this as sort of the missing link in the overall Mano environment to really deploy scalable network functions and scalable network services, I should say. So kind of think of Rift.io as sort of that domain orchestrator that basically fulfills specific network service requests to implement things like VPN as a service or virtual EPC in a very much a multi-VNF, multi-vendor kind of environment.
Interesting.
So our target customers at Rift are the cloud service providers who are the traditional telecom providers, both fixed and mobile, as well as cable. There, we focus a lot of our energy and efforts on delivering this Mano environment to simplify the deployments of SDN and NFV, and not only simplify the deployment, but simplify the way companies operate the infrastructure, and I think that's a key thing for us. And the second dimension to our go-to-market activity centers around the scalability part in terms of the platform that we've built that we target and lead with the ecosystem of network function builders to build much bigger, more scalable VNFs, all the while still interoperating in a service provider's Mano environment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say, the whole Mano environment at this point, I know at least from talking to a lot of the mobile telecom operators that we focus on mostly here, that is an environment that they are very, I don't want to say stressed out about, but it is a challenge for them. I remember doing a report last year on the topic, and I could not get one carrier to even really on the record give me some sort of insight on what they were actually doing, because they didn't seem to even know themselves what they were going to do. And obviously, it's an important part for what they need to do, but even a year ago, they were challenged dramatically in how they were going to, orchestrate everything, and between the services, legacy networks, new networks. There was and it still seems like a bit of a challenge for operators. So it seems like you guys are really at the core of kind of one of the bigger challenges in terms of the continued rollout of SDN and NFV in the telecom and specifically the mobile space as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think part of that challenge comes from, as I think it was Alex Kloberg from Deutsche Telekom who described several years ago this concept of a zoo of orchestrators that are on the market today. And I think, that by and large, I think is part of that challenge that you were just referring to, Dan, in that regardless of who you talk to up and down the stack, everyone proclaims to be the orchestrator. And the reality is that you just have to put things in context around what level of orchestration is actually required for each of the domain or each of the levels of value, in that stack.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I guess as you look at the market today, what are, I guess, what are you seeing in terms of deployment and development by your customers in terms of, rolling out this Mano stack? And I guess maybe what are some of the challenges maybe you're seeing in the market in terms of these operators being able to do this? Because again, it does seem like you said, it's a very important part of the process, but it's still it seems a bit like a pretty complicated part of the process as well.
It really is. And I think, part of the goal for Rift anyway is to simplify, that complexity. But so some of the trends that we're seeing in the market, I would say, over the past several years, I would kind of characterize NFV deployments as islands of deployments. Yeah. So, you have, specific vendor domains, whether it's virtual IMS or virtual EPC, but none of these things are really tied together, in any kind of cohesive way. And so I think that's the broader challenge around how to bring together a multi-vendor, multi-VNF environment to actually orchestrate a network service that a carrier could either save money on or make money from. And so I think that's the key challenge that we see there. But really, as I said, the key trend here are islands of deployments. And now we're kind of getting into sort of the next generation of deployments with technologies like Rift is bringing to market around really now solving that orchestration problem in delivering scalable network services, not just islands of scalable network functions.
Yeah, and it seems like that's perhaps maybe a good omen for the market, because again, maybe we are getting beyond just the deployments of some VNFs in an NFV environment out there. They're actually now looking to link these together, because I know over the past couple of years, even for operators just to roll these out was a bit of a challenge for them. They wanted to do it, and it's a big part of the networks going forward. but now being able to look at the actual tying them together to, like you said, kind of generate revenues or increase efficiency, that we're to that point, seems like it's a good, they're making good progress in terms of this eventual network migration and evolution to more virtualized platforms out there.
Yeah, that's right. I think at the end of the day, I think one of the challenges that a lot of the VNF vendors have had is that not all applications are created equally. Right? The telecom environment, and particularly the mobile telecom environment, is a much different environment than what you see typically in web scale kind of companies like a Facebook and so forth. So when you're offering communications as a service, the requirements for delivering those kinds of services are much different than web scale.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because I talked to a lot of vendors on the show, and the ones that come from the data center IT web scale environment, obviously they've been working in this space for a long time. They're very familiar with it. They're very comfortable with it. But there always seems to be a bit of perhaps a disconnect between what they're doing and what they're used to doing, and then what the telecom space needs, because telecom does seem to have, I don't want to say a higher standard, but people expect, I think, different service quality levels from their telecom provider, whether it's wireless or wireline or even internet, as opposed to what they might get in a Facebook or some sort of web-based environment. Does it seem like that there's still a challenge in kind of bringing those two worlds together? And obviously, being kind of the metal part of it, that's obviously probably a big part of what you need to do is kind of make sure everybody is speaking the same language and that these things can actually work together. Are you seeing still a challenge in making sure that those two sides can I guess be on the same page and I guess learn from each other?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Dan. I think bringing these two worlds of IT and telecom network together, it kind of reminds me of the old days of fixed mobile convergence. So kind of look at this as sort of a fixed mobile convergence, 2.0 or 3.0, if you will. And I think at the end of the day, both sides have something to offer one another. And if you think about where telecom vendors want to go, they want to transform communications services into a communications as a service with all those stringent requirements that I spoke about, and they want to leverage the IT and data center infrastructure, to do that. So as I said, a lot of the requirements in the IT side simply aren't met. So they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. And so I think that's some of the gap that Rift is trying to bring together to kind of meld that world together. In fact, even in our company, we have a world of people here in our R&D team who have lots of networking experience, service provider networking experience, and we have another team of people that we fuse together with lots of data center experience. And so, bringing those two worlds, I think, are key, because the reality then is for the telco customer, their world is no longer limited to just communications as a service. They're aspiring to get into SaaS-based services and take advantage of the connected home, car, enterprise, and this big genre of machine to machine. And so, to do that, we have to have a common platform that spans both worlds of the data center world as well as communications as a service world. So I think, what's happening, if you look at service provider strategies, over time, we've shifted from more of a standards, closed group set of standards to more of an open source set of strategies, which I think is really the forum where these two groups are coming together.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Obviously, the open source community has become a much bigger a voice, it seems like, in this move towards virtualization. I mean, I've gone to a lot of events, Linux Foundation events, and different organizations have popped up over the past couple of years, really focused on open source as really driving a lot of this. And the carriers I've talked to, I mean, they want open source. I mean, they want to be able to get out of that old model of kind of being locked into a certain vendor. They want to be able to deploy something that can be used, from anybody, and it all works together seamlessly. I guess what sort of development and how has that kind of played along? I mean, how has that evolved? I guess in terms of I guess bringing open source to the scale and quality level that telecom needs, because that seems like that's always been kind of the knock against open source was, the scalability issue might have been in question, or there might have been maybe a quality of service issue that could have been in question. Has the open source community, you think, really kind of stepped up its game and is able to kind of really support what the telecom market needs in terms of those two topics?
They have, but they haven't at the pace that the industry needs to get to.
Yeah.
And the way I would, sort of frame out, my observation on the various open source communities is that there's a lot of different open source communities. And I think, for some operators, just understanding the context of who's playing at what level in the overall stack, can be somewhat challenging. But I think the other challenge that we've seen is that, by and large, a lot of the specific, open source communities that exist today from a governance model are very much big vendor driven. What we see as a change and a slight shift that needs to happen to, I think, really advance the cause for accelerating SDN and NFV deployments is to shift the governance model a little bit on the open source communities to make this more operator led instead of big vendor led.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see a shift like that in communities like the OSM community that's newly formed under ETSI.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I want to come back to the Etsy part there. Well, but you're right. It did seem like there for a while, every week there was a new open source community led group coming out, and they seemed like they were always taking a smaller and smaller sliver of the bigger pie to kind of focus on. And I was always questioning, whether at the end of the day, if you keep slicing this thing up in such small levels, at the end of the day, will it all be a pie again? I mean, can you bring it all back together? I mean, is everybody focused at the right end goal? It seems like from those I've talked to, that they have that in mind, and that should be the case. Does it seem like, from your point of view, that everybody does have the same end goal in mind when they're working through the different little slivers that they're focused on?
I think most of the little sliver of work, I think, is very, very important. But I don't know that everybody's all the open source communities are aligned to that same goal. So to that end, my view and observation is that these little slivers and slices of open source communities are absolutely needed, and I kind of equate them back to the old telco days in ETSI and ETSI standards, where we produced working groups and technical steering committees, right? So I think one of the things that we I think need to do a better job at, as a set of communities, is collaboration amongst the communities.
Yeah, interesting. And again, touching back on the Etsy topic there, I know recently you guys were included as part of, I think, Etsy's open source manual group, I believe, using some of your code for that as well. It does seem like, obviously Etsy has a lot on its plate. I mean, it's a big organization doing a lot of things, and it seems like the world of NFV and SDN is moving so rapidly that perhaps it might be a little difficult for an organization like that to keep pace. But it does seem like that they are really making the effort to really bring in the vendor community, the ones who have some knowledge, operators, obviously, to really push it. I guess, how's the work been with Etsy, and what's your view on how Etsy has been able to, I guess, stay on top of the pace of development and the pace that operators seem to want this market to be moving at, and getting standards together and making sure everybody's kind of on the same page?
Yeah, my observation is that the pace of the OSM community under the umbrella of Etsy is moving actually quite rapidly. It was formed back in the fourth quarter of 2015, and really started to gel in the first quarter. And now I think there's a very viable roadmap, a very aggressive roadmap that the community has put forth. And I think one of the things that I really like about the OSM community is that it's very use case driven. So it is one of the communities that I mentioned that whose governance model is really operator led, and so because it's operator led, it's use case driven. So what are the services that network services that an operator could deploy to either save money or make money, and I think that's the fundamental driver there.
Yeah.
But I think the pace of change and the growth of that community is gelling quite nicely.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, the use case scenario, that's something I know when I've talked to operators more recently, they're looking at that aspect now. I mean, obviously the technology seems like that the technology is moving along at a good pace, and everybody's pretty comfortable with that part of it. But now, yeah, they're looking at, so now that I have this, what can I do with it? How can I, generate revenues or new markets, or what can I do with it? That seems like that's kind of the new focus for those guys, that they have moved beyond just kind of looking at it and actually wanting to kind of see what they can now do with these new technologies on their networks too.
Yep, that's right. And, on that order of collaboration, that I was speaking about,
Yeah.
At Rift, we collaborate with Mirantis, Canonical, OpenStack. That Canonical is also part of OSM, as is Mirantis. So I think it's a great collaboration, from that level. And we also have, other collaborations northbound of us with the end-to-end service orchestrators and the service assurance folks like Senix and some of the others out there.
Yeah.
And I think, the other fundamental piece I think that's currently missing in a lot of the open source communities, including OSM, at the moment, where we all need to do a better job at recruiting, is the systems integration community. Because I think at the end of the day, a service provider is generally not a systems integrator, and they're still looking for that that one throat to choke. So we have to do a better job at making sure that we're bringing in systems integrators into the mix as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know the operators who seem to be really driving the evolution at this point, the larger ones that we know about, the AT&Ts, the Telefonicas of the world. Yeah, and speaking with them, that has been they brought that up as saying that they've almost been forced to kind of be the integrator because they can't really find someone who can bring this all together at the pace and the scale that they want. And so yeah, it does seem like a lot of them are being forced into that role. And for the operators that are perhaps still waiting to make this move, they probably won't have the technology or the expertise to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously for now, maybe the big guys can handle it themselves, but going down the road, that's going to be critical because these smaller operators aren't going to have the resources to do it themselves. So it's a good point. It seems like that's going to be a market that really needs to kind of evolve, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, a couple things to point out, from your comment is, for a company like Rift, we view ourselves as a best-of-breed, pure-play orchestrator, operating orchestration with scale, as I said. But at the end of the day, even if you're a big vendor, there's no one single vendor who can do it all in terms of putting that end-to-end service together, for an operator. So even the big guys have to work with some of the smaller guys and cooperate amongst themselves to create this end-to-end service. So that's definitely key. And I can tell you, that at Rift, as part of our own ecosystem and partner ecosystem, which is very important to our own community development, the systems integration community is certainly a big part of our play in terms of partnerships going forward.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you kind of a wrap-up question of, what do you see as some of the big challenges? And you kind of mentioned one already there, kind of the working with the vendor community. I mean, it does seem like you're right. I mean, in the telecom space, there are established large vendors who have certain business models, and obviously they're having to change their business models. And it seems like perhaps there's maybe it's not quite as smooth as working together with a lot of these companies at this point. Does it seem like, is that maybe the big challenge still facing the industry at this point, is making sure that all the vendor community can work together and, at the end of the day, can provide the operators with the platforms that they need that aren't that can work together, I guess, at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, but I think there's probably a bigger challenge that I'll talk about in a minute. But I think, from the challenge around vendor collaboration, I think a lot of that is kind of manifesting itself now in open source communities and so forth. And I think, at the end of the day, the technology's here. It's just about putting together and stitching together the right pieces of technology that are non-proprietary, that an operator, could deploy in a very common way. So that's happening. And I think, as the quote-unquote, new open source standards mature, I think a lot of that will flush out, and it's rapidly, gaining momentum and maturity, over time. For me personally, here at Rift, I think, part of the bigger challenge, that we see is, really kind of working through a lot of the marketing fluff and marketing hype that happens. And I mentioned this earlier around, really coming up with a standard definition of terms around, what the different levels of orchestration are and what each level of orchestrators actually do, to produce this service. And so I can tell you that even in our own, collaborations with some of the partners that we have now, when we make our first introductions, it's, well, we're an orchestrator. And, right away you get the negative body language and people are, well, we're an orchestrator. It didn't matter where. So there's a lot of that, education, I think, that still has to happen in the industry.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like it's spoken like someone who's definitely been in the industry for quite some time. Because that is something that I think those of us who've been following the market as well, I think would agree with you that there has to be some sort of standardization there. And you have to get beyond all the marketing fluff. Because I remember, back in 2014, I think it was, everybody was talking, hey, 2015 is going to be a big year for all of this. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
All this hype at the top of the hype cycle. And I think we realized that there was still some work to be done. But that's kind of part of the process, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, to your point around timing, I get asked that a lot from my investors and and my leadership team, and our view is that what we're seeing is much larger scale deployments of the network services orchestrated in a multi-vendor, multi-VNF way towards the end of 2016, with real growth coming in 2017. And I mentioned earlier that we're focused and pivot really on use cases. And when I think about specifically for mobile operators, the advent and all the discussions going on around 5G, we clearly see SDN and NFV as being a foundational enabling technology for 5G, for use cases like mobile edge computing and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's 5G. We talk about a lot of at RCR here, and obviously it does seem like the timing of all of this, with the 5G deployment timelines and the virtualization deployment timelines do seem to line up pretty well. And you're right. What people expect from 5G, if you don't have a good base of virtualized platforms out there that are working solidly, you can't do 5G. There's so many parts of 5G that are going to require automation and just things working, in real time, that if you don't have that base there, you really can't get the full benefits of what 5G is supposed to bring to the market. So obviously that's going to be a huge part of this is you got to have that virtualized layer first, then you can start thinking about 5G on top of that.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and maybe one final topic, again, you kind of mentioned about some of the challenges out there. Are you guys finding any, I guess, internal challenges at Rift there in terms of, workforce challenges? I know recently OpenStack, had mentioned some work that they're doing with trying to educate the workforce out there on the terms of OpenStack and cloud. Are you guys internally, I guess, finding any sort of challenges in getting employees or bringing employees up to speed in terms of of how quickly this market is evolving and making sure that the skill set that they have is right for what's needed out there?
Yes and no. I think at the end of the day, what we're finding is, you generally have people who are very well versed in networking technologies, where you have people who come from the IT side who are very well versed in data center technologies. And so, for us, we recognize that, and what we've done is, develop programs around bringing these two worlds together. A vision of mine here at Rift, we're a small company still, as we evolve our partner ecosystem program, is to create more outbound educational programs for the market.
Interesting. Yeah, like you said earlier, you do have kind of like two sides of the market that you have the guys who are familiar with the web scale side, you got the telecom guys, and bringing those guys together, and they can learn from each other too, which is probably a big part of it as well. So very interesting insight there. Yeah. Well, hey Ben, definitely appreciate the good insight on this today. Obviously, you guys are working in a space like we mentioned earlier that is kind of really the crux to this whole movement towards virtualized platforms, and the orchestration aspect of it is going to be big, and it's a challenging aspect that operators are really aware of. So sounds like you guys got some pretty busy weeks and pretty busy weekends coming up, but we definitely appreciate the great insight today on the topic. Thanks so much for the time. Well, that'll do it for this week's show. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with Peter Jarrett, who's the Vice President of Consumer and Infrastructure at Kernel Analysis, to get an update on NFV and SDN development and deployment progress. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.